Fathers of Nations, Chapter 3. Professor Kimani joined the University of Nairobi directly as a senior lecturer. Even before taking off, he was already flying. There was a reason Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda had just dismantled the University of East Africa. Kenya's past of the university now remained the University of Nairobi, found itself with a vacancy it had to fill immediately in its Institute of Development Studies. Professor Kimani, who had just completed his studies at the University of Oxford, wrote from there to say he wanted to fill it. To ensure he came and filled it for sure, the University of Nairobi raised his entry point from that of a lecturer to that of a senior lecturer. He came. Only a month after his arrival, he launched a noisy debate in which he demanded that the University of Nairobi henceforth strive for relevance to the society rather than simply excellence of its work. It was not clear exactly what he meant by relevance to the society. However, a short 6 months later, he prevailed. The university's official's motto became relevance to the society. After winning this war, he started another war which was even noisier. Now he wanted the university to be an agent of change, not a mere spectacle of it. This was when people still thought this view was too radical and reduced it as simple-minded. So, not surprisingly, some of his colleagues, puzzled by his refusal to see that it was too radical, looked at him and then shook their heads in disbelief. Others, baffled by his inability to see that it was simple-minded, did or said little, convinced that he would fall on his face before long and self-destruct on his own without their help. He did not care. After all, his antics in the wars that he had started and won had also won him the heart of a campus beauty queen. Her name was Asia Omondi. He married her on a rainy but approving Saturday to claps of thunder and flashes of lightning. How marriage then accelerated academic success. A professorship soon followed. After that achievement, he felt fulfilled. His persona was now complete. Had anyone told him this happiness would one day end as it did, he would have laughed himself upside down. A global economic recession came. Africa was not spared. Jobs and incomes vanished. To get out of the crisis, Africa had to make changes. Changes. They were everywhere. Donors were the forces behind them. Tuni, Professor Kimani told his daughter. Tuni owed that name to Tunisia, believed to be her country of conception. Her father had gone there for a conference, her mother for the ride. What the donors did, Tuni, was to gang up on Africa. Professor Kimani said before he took a lick of his ice cream. He and his daughter were cooling off at some low-end restaurant in central Nairobi. Look here, you Africa, the donor said with one voice, you'll get no more aid from us unless you change this and the other, understand? What did Africa do? Tuni asked. She was deep into her second ice cream. Of course Africa did as told, he said. Mind you, the donors did well to hang tough. Were it not for them, we'd still be reciting foolish cliches about home growing our own development strategies instead of importing foreign models. He took another lick of his ice cream and grimaced. Why? He wondered. Had no whiz kid invented warm ice cream yet? We're not enjoying your ice cream, Dad, are you? Tuni asked. It's too cold, he told her. Then he put it aside and continued. Sadly, late changes only catalyze success. When at last they come, people go on a rampage to make up for time they feel they have lost. Nowhere was this rampage more evident than in parliaments, the very institutions that epitomized change. Nowhere was excess more revolting than in a coup that a parliament staged. The parliament staged a coup? Yes, and they staged it successfully. Look, the year I started teaching, members of parliament still earned less, I repeat, less than professors did. Now each MP rakes up to 100 times, repeat, 100 times the income of a professor makes. It gets worse. Earnings by professors still consist of salaries which are taxable, whereas earnings by MPs are no longer deemed salaries and have long ceased to be taxable. Both the rise in income by MPs and the exemption of that income from taxation came with a coup. I thought the days of coups were over. Ha ha ha. Think again, Tony. Not only do we still have coups by soldiers, now we also have coups by lawmakers. These latter coups are even more lethal because they are legal. It is legal for lawmakers to raise their wages as they please. Yes, it is. Why is that? Because legal only means permitted by those who make the laws. The MPs make the laws and raise their income. Legal does not mean moral or even normal. It does not? No. To seal their power against reversal, all the MPs need to do now is amend the existing constitution by inserting in it one tiny clause. Since God himself cannot lower the wages MPs give to themselves, then neither can mere MPs. Is that possible? Absolutely. After that has happened, the coup that brought these new wages about became irreversible. So you see, parliaments can be even worse than armies. Tony blinked uncomprehendingly. Worse than armies? She asked. She had her mother's eyes, wings of an imported butterfly, pure black in the middle, pure white at the margins, ringed with inch-long eyelashes. Whenever she blinked, her eyelashes fluttered as if they were about to fly away. Dad, what do you mean? The eyelashes were fluttering. You see, Tony, soldiers could stage coups, true. However, since they were not lawmakers, they couldn't legalize their action. In other words, they only broke the law, nothing more. Now MPs do more. They break the law and legalize that breach as a new law. That's what I mean. But when elections come, the electorate votes them out, right? Yes. Just as when rain comes, water washes off the spots of a leopard. Dad, I'm serious. The wings of the butterfly were fluttering madly. Then listen to me. New parliaments are just like the old. No, they are more like the old. They raise their salaries more than did the old. The long and short of it, Tony, is that nothing has really changed. Change in Africa has only replaced tyranny by presidents with tyranny by MPs. He paused to think, then resumed. Come to think of it, the French have always had it right. They say, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Actually, we have had it all along as well. We say, msitu mpya, nyani wale wale. New forest, same old monkeys. Asked Tony. Correct. Dad, you've considered going into politics? Me going to politics? No, politics isn't for me. Teaching is. Guarding had come of age in Kenya. No longer was it marginal activity it once had been. It had matured into a fully fledged industry. Now it did not stop at just home protection. It covered other areas as well. In the transport area, it meant vehicles full of touch-me-not anti-theft gadgetry. In the tourism sector, it meant tour operators warning foreigners against showing valuables in public. In the workplace, it meant seminars on personal safety and so on. Professor Kimani viewed this growth in guarding with disapproval, to which it added contempt. He considered it a symptom of failure by the state to ensure the safety of its citizens. His daughter held a more practical view. Mom and Dad, do you want to hear something clever that I did today? She asked her parents breezily at supper one evening. I attended a seminar on personal safety. That's what I did. Professor Kimani snorted. You call that clever? He helped himself to more food. Tony, safety isn't a clever thing we do by attending seminars. It is a necessity the state should provide to us. And if it can't, He did not answer. She waited. Still, no reply came. Finally, Asiya answered, "Then safety becomes a private arrangement that we make for ourselves." Sia, Professor Kimani preferred this form of his wife's name to its full version of Asiya. Sia, all that any private arrangement to do is exempt the state from even trying to render the services that our taxes oblige it to give us. Mother and daughter looked at each other knowingly. How often had they heard him express that view? Yet did it not ignore reality at the expense of prosperity? People who don't like poverty and want prosperity temper their views with the reality. He did not. "Look at each other all you want," he told his wife and his daughter. "Next, you'll be saving. You want to hire your own police and army. What will remain for the state to do?" "What do you say, Dad?" Tony said with a sigh. "But before you change the world and get it to render the services our taxes oblige it to give us, some of us intend to keep on taking steps that assure our personal safety, such as precautions against male violence. Over 2/3 of women in this country witness it, and other women are on themselves. I'm not joking, Dad. That's what the seminar instructor said." Tony turned to her mother. "Mom, as a woman, you should be showing me just a little more interest here." "And I am, Tony." Asiya sat up to show more of it. "Go on, Tony, please." She said that there are 3 reasons why women are easy prey. Asiya knitted her brow into a question. She? "Yes, ma'am. The seminar instructor was a woman. The first reason," she said, "is a lack of awareness of where we are. As women, we should always be keenly aware of where we are and what is going on around us. The second reason is a look of weakness and helplessness. Instead of looking weak and helpless, we should appear strong and in control. The third reason is a temptation to stray. We should never walk into bad neighborhoods, walk alone in alleys or take stairs when there are elevators." Professor Kimani leaned back in his chair. "Another slow day at the office? Ha, Tony," he sneered. "Surely you knew all of that already?" She glowered at him. "Dad, this isn't about knowing. No, it's about doing. It's about women protecting themselves against criminals, male criminals. Dad." She made these remarks sound as if her father, another male, might be a criminal. Asiya touched her gently in a calming gesture. "Don't mind your father, Tony. Now, what else did the instructor teach you? You're not going to eat like it, ma'am." "Oh, what won't I?" "Because it's what you do, and yet you should not do it. After completing an errand, shopping or whatever, women like to get into their cars and," said the instructor, "just sit there for a while. Don't deny it, ma'am. You do it, too." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do." "I do not." "Never do it, ma'am. A predator could be watching you. So the moment you get into your car, lock all the doors and drive off at once. What if a predator has a gun and has cornered you before you get in?" Asiya's arm flew up in panicky surrender. "Tony, stop it. The predator has a gun." The arms rose higher. "Then you comply, Tony. You do as he says." "Wrong. Listen to me, Tony. I'm your mother. You comply." "Mother, comply," I said. "Ma'am, our instructor explained why it makes sense to run away instead." "I don't care what your stupid instructor said." "All right, ma'am. Now, suppose you're driving with a predator seated beside you." Asiya cringed. "Tony, I'm not sure I want to hear this. Crash the car." "What? Tony, are you out of your mind?" "Crash it hard. This will immobilize the predator with surprise and allow you to escape. But our family only has that dying old Toyota. Yes, crash it." Tony turned back at her father. "By the way, Dad, is there any chance of me using the car tomorrow?" He winced. The question must well have been that an enemy had shot at the face, so to mock him. He fumbled for an excuse but told the truth instead. "Our car is done again, Tony," he said lamely. "I'll have it fixed soon as I get my next salary. Asia was looking at him. Once again, she had seen him as a young man going places. Now she only saw an old man going nowhere. His very car had become a metaphor of him. It was going nowhere as well. Later that evening, she offered him an idea. Karanja leave the university and go to greener pastures somewhere. In the wounds this idea opened on him, she rubbed salt with a Newborn left the university and went to greener pastures somewhere. Now look, he's an MP with focus. This hurt. Before going to parliament, Newborn Walome, a rowdy fellow from a minor tribe without roads or schools, had been a junior college colleague of Professor Kimani at the university. Yes, this hurt. So why did Professor Kimani not leave as well? Because he was a born teacher. He always told us here. And so a teacher, he would die. Losers such as Lumu swam in money, would explain, only because even failed states have a few mansions. Since losers like to reward fellow losers, losers invariably end up occupying some of those mansions. Still, losers, they all were and always would be. First, there was a loud crash. Some moving object had hit another moving object. A trailer hooked to a truck negotiating a turn at a roundabout had broken free, spun outward, and ended up on top of a minibus in an adjacent lane. The drivers of both vehicles had then run away. They had done so to avoid mob justice. Now, the passengers in the unlucky minibus were scrambling to get out, except for one, a woman trapped in her seat. A man had seen her on his way out. He tried to go back in and get her out, but all doors had jammed. He pulled a mobile phone out of his pocket and called the mystical number 999 to report distress and request for help. The hour was 10 in the morning. Onlookers started arriving. First, they only gawked, fascinated by the spectacle of a trailer sitting on top of a minibus. Goodness, how did it get there? Later, their attention moved down to the woman trapped inside the minibus. Look, said another onlooker. A beautiful girl was trapped in her seat. She was still conscious. She's fine, then, said another onlooker. Come on, said the first onlooker. A heavy trailer is sitting on her minibus, so how can she be fine? When the onlookers became a crowd, they tried to push the trailer off the minibus. They failed. Then a big van appeared. Ah, this could work, they said. What if the van hitched with the trailer through a chain, then drove off? It was a good idea, but the chain kept breaking. Each time the van pulled, the trailer rose up a little at its hitched end. Seconds later, the chain snapped, and the trailer fell back down on the minibus. Every time the trailer fell back down like that, people closed their eyes in fear because it punched the roof of the minibus down further. The situation could have been any worse in any angry god. And some dark cloud was using the trailer as a hammer to beat down a minibus. 4 attempts later, the roof started yielding and crushing the woman down. Just then, a male giant came out of nowhere. He was carrying an axe. The crowd hushed. It was puzzled and perhaps scared. After realizing that he meant no harm, it relaxed and parted to make way for him. He walked towards the minibus. The moment he reached it, he spat on his palms, rubbed one against the other and started whacking. Hack! Hack! He was still hacking when the minibus, now further weakened by the axe, gave in and collapsed. As it crumbled, amid groans of yelling metal, it compressed to the ground, the poor woman trapped inside. Her ordeal ended only after the minibus has been squeezed out a final breath. So Tuni Kimani did not die in an act of male violence after all. Male violence she would have fought against, given her empowering seminars on personal safety, might have conquered. She died in a freak road accident, in a minibus and a truck trailer. Mother and father were inconsolable. Then at their daughter's peril, finally in a way that ended all doubt and all hope about her, closure came. Grief sharing then turned into progress towards recovery. 6 months later, they were well enough again. One day, Ashia woke up dejected again, not about Tuni this time, but about her husband. She seemed to loathe him all of a sudden. If he had as much as a peer about to touch her, she jumped back and shunked away. He pretended he understood why she did so. In the weeks that followed, He kept out of her path. If he nonetheless ran into her accidentally, he retreated at once, acting as if he had meant to go somewhere else. She saw through his lies. Only with the tiniest of wordless nod did she show she saw through them. For months, this was where matters stood. Then one morning, wordless nods turned into wordless smiles. Good, said to himself. Things were looking up, but she never really snapped out of her gloom. She still moped and moaned, and he still watched and waited. One evening, just as they all climbed into bed for night, she dropped the bomb. I'm leaving, she said. The bed cracked. What do you mean you're leaving? Professor Kimani asked. He knew the answer. She did not want to stay with him anymore. He pressed her. What's going on, Asia? Newborn has asked me to marry him, she said. This part he did not know. Newborn Walomu? He asked. Then he sat up in his half of the bed. Yes, Newborn Walomu. I'm leaving tomorrow. But why is here? He did not wait for the answer. It's his money, isn't it? How dare you, Karanja, she shouted. Then she also sat up in the half of her bed and turned a bedlam and glowered at him. For you, I've done without money for over 30 years. Repeat, 30 years. And now you have the gall to say money is the reason I want to leave? Well, isn't it? He retorted. Look, Sia, money doesn't guarantee happiness. Ha, she scoffed. Then she slid back into bed, turned to the other side, and wiggled away from him. Bed roared. You talk of happiness, you. Have you no shame? You couldn't tell what happiness was if it fell on your lap and cried out its name. She wiggled further away. Then you say money doesn't guarantee happiness. Never having had it, how would you know that it doesn't? All I'm saying, Sia, is he slid back into bed as well. The bed protested that even the rich had their share of troubles, plus more trouble from their wealth. Ha! If their wealth were a problem, why don't they simply give it away? He tried a different approach. In any case, is this a good time for us to part? As soon as the death of our daughter? Leave Tuni out of this, she shouted. She would still be alive if you had a real car. That really hurt. Tuni didn't die in our car, Sia, he said limply in self-defense. Then he tried another angle. What happened to couples aging together gracefully anyway? 60 is no age to part, surely is it? You mean I should have left earlier, before I turned 60? Well, I did not. Does not mean I should not, nor does I did mean I will. That is why if I did not leave before, now I should. And it is why if I did stay then, now I will not. She left the following morning. A secretary, young and pretty, met Professor Kimani at the main door, then smiled him in. He smiled, he now realized, had nothing to do with him. It was a reminder from some joke still floating in the air when he arrived. As proof of that fact, inside the room was another secretary, also young and pretty, who was smiling as well. In her case, she was smiling only with her eyes, her hands having clamped her mouth. Pending his departure, after which she would pull all stop and burst out laughing. He introduced himself. Both women killed their smiles and scrambled to block access to a closed door in front of them. He knew who was behind the door. Newborn Walome, MP. So, brushing the two guys aside, he went and opened the door. Anyway, and who sat before him now? If it was not his arch-enemy, he was fat. And that was how Professor Kimani greeted him. You, fat baboon. The man had been reclining in a black leather chair behind a shiny mahogany desk. Now, he brought himself back into an upright position. Except for a mounted, non-plated announcement, he's a newborn Walome MP. The desk had absolutely nothing on it. This is my office, Karanja, he said. We'll use nothing but civil language while you're in it. Do you understand? Professor Kimani did not answer. What a triumph that already was, his enemy thought. Absence of an answer meant submission. To celebrate this easy victory, the man rocked in his chair back and forth fast. Then he spoke again. Karanja, was there something specific that you came to see me about? Again, Professor Kimani did not answer. Another victory. This time the man tried to celebrate it with a smile, but he killed it. Since his leaving the university, his belly had grown into a ball, big and firm. It should have become a handicap, yet it had not. Was he not husband to 3 beautiful young women who had already borne him a child each? It paid for itself through reproductive success, which it owed to its cause, a soft seat in Parliament. He had won the seat in a by-election. Gunmen scaring off pursuers had killed his predecessor. a wagering rogue whimsically nicknamed Kazi Kubwa Pesa Ndogo, or Big Work Small Money, while he was wobbling drunkenly out of a bar. Now, there Mr. Kazi Kubwa Pesa Ndogo's successors were sluggish and groggy, like a saturated python with a hangover, in a big office furnished at public expense with black leather chairs and 2 pretty secretaries. Karanja, take a seat, he said, gesturing at a chair. Professor Kimani rejected it. Keep it. Fine, stand there forever if you like. See, if I care. Let me guess. You came to ask why I want to marry Asia. Am I right? You have a nerve, you heap of... Watch your tongue, Karanja. I'm not going to warn you about your language again. Why do you want to steal my wife? The word I use was marry. You prefer steal. What good is she to you? Professor Kimani cursed him. For that wording, he had degraded not only his wife, but also himself, and in the same breath upgraded his foe. What good is she to me? Is that what you asked? Because she is much older than I am? Is that what you mean? Here's my answer. Old is gold. Mr. Walomu opponents had a different answer. When a cat gets into a pigeon coop, they said, it kills all the pigeons it finds there, not just those it will eat. Mr. Walomu had already eaten 3 pigeons, and now had his paw on a 4th. Asia, strewn along his path, lay many others he had killed but not eaten. So who could say for sure that months hence Asia could not become one of these? Mr. Walomu continued, as for what you call stealing, a professor in Texas says that lots of people do it. He threw in a Swahili cliche to support his claim, na hivyo ndivyo livyo. To help it along, he gave an approximate English equivalent, and that's how the cookies crumbles. That was mockery Professor Kimani felt had to reject. You have 3 beautiful wives, he began. This was a silly start, as even he realized he had not sounded an envious loser. Nonetheless, he went on. All of them are young. And young they'll still be the day I die, Mr. Walomu added. Karanja, you know the saying, a real bull dies with green grass in its mouth. Then why do you want to steal my wife? She's old, not the green grass you want in your mouth. I just told you why. Old is gold. Anyway, stealing, to use your word, is not all that uncommon, you know. My Texas guy says 30% of the British still married spouses for their partners. Repeat, 30%. That is a lot of spouses still us there. Would you say? Professor Kimani refused to bite this man's bait. Still, the man continued. Now, take the Americans. Contrary to what everyone thinks, Karanja, Americans are not great spouse stealers at all. They check in at a mere 17%, way behind the British. In fact, to cut a long story short, only the Greeks are greater spouse stealers than the British. Boy, do the Greeks know this spouse stealing business. They come in at a whole 40%. The man was now toying with Professor Kimani. Unable to tolerate it anymore, Professor Kimani moved to end it. You greedy fat baboon, he shouted, closing in. The man stood up. Stop where you are, Karanja, he said. Professor Kimani kept coming. When he was near enough, he swung a fist. He missed. First you steal my wife, he said. He swung another. He missed again. Now you mock me as well. He swung yet another. This time, he lost his balance and fell. Mr. Walomu pounced at once. Now you die, Karanja, he said. A clumpy scuffle, as between bull elephants, followed. It ended only when the police came and arrested the 2 angry men. Professor Kimani was charged with assaulting a member of parliament. His university followed suit by demoting him from his current rank as full professor back to his starting rank as a senior lecturer. This, it said, was his due punishment for disgracing the university in the eye of the public. 6 months of jail followed. Then he was set free. As he walked back to his house, dejectedly putting foot ahead of foot, his career was all he could see, and it was doomed beyond revival. Professor Kimani had a knock. Weary from lack of sleep, a recurring problem now, he grumbled all the way to the door. Why didn't people just stay in their own homes? A white man, 50 plus years, was standing outside, looking from side to side, as if an enemy might have been following him. Is this you, Professor Kimani? He asked. His voice was a lion's roar, deep, reverberating and eerie. His eyes were green. Yes, answered Professor Kimani hesitantly. We've never met before, Professor Kimani, the visitor said, but I've heard and read a lot about you. Here, my card. Thanks, Professor Kimani took it. I'm Tad, said the visitor. Tad Longway, Director of Special Projects of AGDA. Make that the Agency for Government and Development in Africa. We are based in Cape Town, South Africa. Professor Kimani compared this oral information with that which was written on the card. They matched. So how can I help you, Mr. Longway? Sir, Mark, also known as Mark Thatcher, is the son of former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, remarked the visitor. Does his name perhaps ring a bell? Perhaps it does, perhaps it doesn't. This self-negating answer was Professor Kimani's response, not to the man's question, but to the question's irrelevance. Sir, Mark lives in South Africa these days, as you perhaps already know. Now, a few years ago, he hired soldiers. No, mercenaries. Missionaries might even be a better word, actually. You see, they believed they were on a mission, but call them whatever you want. My point is, sir, Mark hired them to go state a coup in Equatorial Guinea. Now, last year, the government of South Africa hauled him in and fined him $1 million. Add to that a 4-year jail sentence that immediately suspended. Mr. Longway, you were saying the relevance of Mr. Thatcher's attempts coup in Equatorial Guinea to assist visits here this morning is what again? Professor Kimani asked. Actually, I wasn't saying there was any such relevance, Professor Kimani. Still, you're right, I suspect I was. Do you see what I mean? Professor Kimani shook his head. Actually, I don't. No, you don't. Then perhaps I should come in for a minute and explain. May I? All right, but for only a minute, okay? Please come in. He led the visitor to his living room. The man followed him. I'll be brief, Professor Kimani. Yes, please. He sat down. The man sat down too. Professor Kimani, all that our presidents ever do to us is to ride on our backs. Is that right? We must stop them from doing that to us. I mean us, Africans. Did you say us, Africans? Up to this point, the visitor had been speaking with a bitonal accent, seemingly mid-Atlantic from sounding both American and British. Now he switched to the South African accent, monotonal. Yes, I said, us, Africans. Each word throaty, had the sound of a big boot grinding gravel on an unpaved road. Professor Kimani, I South African, or as we say back home, as African, so I just as much African as you are. Don't you do judging me by the color of my cover. Amused again himself, Professor Kimani chuckled. I wasn't judging you by the color of any cover, Mr. Longway. I apologize if I seemed I was. Please continue. Thank you, said the visitor. His accent was bitonal again, American and British. As I was saying, Professor Kimani, we must not let our leaders keep riding on our backs and wrecking our lives. When our lives are all we've got. At independence, they told us our problems were 3: poverty, ignorance, and disease. They promised to eradicate all 3. Decades later, have they eradicated even one? Instead, they have added a 4th, corruption. And this time, you don't hear them promising to eradicate it because, as its primary beneficiary, they mean to keep it. Results? Everyone has taken the cue from them and embraced corruption as well. Listen, I get sick each time I hear out presidents telling the police to stop taking bribes. Why should they stop? When those who tell them to stop take even bigger bribes. I tell you something else, Professor Kimani. Our presidents are busy adding a 5th problem right under our noses, impunity. You can see how far they have gone with it by just looking at their reluctance to punish offense. They just don't want to do it. Now, will they change? No. To change, there has to be an agency with a will to change. I'm not sure I understand you, Mr. Longway. Are you saying you know of an agency somewhere that has a will to change Africa? Yes, AGDA. Make that agency for governance and development in Africa. Professor Kimani remembered the information on the visitor's card. Yes. That's your outfit. No, that is our think tank, you see, Professor Kimani. When presidents keep messing things up, public discontent accumulates until it becomes an anger, later rage, and eventually fury. Yet, even as fury, it never really produces change. Why doesn't it? Well, because fury spills out in random acts of violence. Those acts cancel one another out. To bring change, they have to add up instead. Do you follow me? Professor Kimani put a hand over his mouth to kill a yawn before he spoke. I'm listening, he said. Please continue. So, Professor Kimani, now enter AGDA. Our mission at AGDA is to question Africans' status quo. We ask what it will take to develop this continent. Therefore, we also ask if human effort is up to task, or if instead we need supernatural help, or indeed if Africa will ever develop. Along the way, we bump into an unnerving question. Are present leaders helping or impeding Africa's development agenda? It's a long way. I'm now sure that there has been a mistake. You've confused me with someone else. You see, I'm a teacher. So I'm not the activist you're looking for. A teacher is an activist, Professor Kimani. May I tell you why? No. Here is why. A teacher's job is to coach people towards a better future. An activist's job is to coerce them towards that future. You have to admit the two sound as if they might overlap, and they do overlap. While there may be some differences between our methods and yours, there are bigger similarities between your ultimate objectives and ours. Now, if your worry is about the differences, no, we'll always accept your recommendations about them through the path that you'd like to follow. There is a path you'd like me to follow? Yes, Path Alpha. Path what? Alpha. You see, Path Alpha is a strategy built on an idea that I mentioned earlier, that at present, public discontent expresses itself in acts that cancel out instead of adding up. Path Alpha will correct that anomaly. Mobilizing civic discontent into will to change is our motto. Unless there is a will to change, there will be no change. So says the law of will. It's all in here. The man held up a document titled Path Alpha, then handed it to Professor Kimani. Yours, he said. Professor Kimani accepted the document but laid it aside, then asked, why did you pick me as a possible recruit? Because you fit the profile of a Path Alpha traveler to a T is why. By the way, the correct term is traveler, not recruit. There's a world of difference between the two, Professor Kimani. I'm sure there is. So, what is the profile of a path traveler? A path traveler, you left out Alpha. Well, the profile only has two elements really. One, the traveler must believe in Path Alpha. Then, you've determined either that I already believe in Path Alpha or I soon will. But what means? When you do not even know me, goodness, you've just met me. So, how have you worked it all out like that? From your history, Professor Kimani, from your history. That's how. We looked at your past as an idealist. You have? You think we haven't? Sorry, please continue. 2, the Path Alpha travelers must have the drive to pursue goals, the tenacity to stick with them, the visitor said. For Path Alpha, these two qualities are indispensable. And of course, you have established that I have the drive and tenacity, remarked Professor Kimani dryly. I won't ask how you did it. From your history again, Professor Kimani. From your history again, said the stranger. Then he smiled and apparently also winked. He had reached the end of his presentation now. Path Alpha is a noble course. Professor Kimani, he added, please join us. We'll cover all your expenses and remunerations of course. All of them. Suppose I join. Be careful here now. I'm not saying I will. I said suppose. What exactly will you want me to do? There will be many opportunities for me to answer that question fully later. Let me just tell you 2 things. First, if you join Path Alpha, we want you to come down for orientation at our headquarters in Cape Town. Second, we want you to attend the next summit in African Head State, scheduled to take place soon in Banjul, the Gamba. Me, attend a summit, when I would even be allowed to come near the gates. Don't worry, Professor Kimani. AGDA will get observer status for you. Leave that to us. So what do you say? I'll think about it. Yes. Let it stew in your mind on its own for the rest of the day while you do the other things. Then tonight, retrieve it and mull over it between the sheets. Kick it back and forth, back and forth. I said, I'll think about it. He almost shouted. He enlisted the following day. Loss of a daughter, desertion of a wife, and mistreatment by his university and by the state. These had tested him hard and long. Finally, he had reached breaking point. He used to think he was born to teach and to die a teacher. Such was not the case anymore. Now all he wanted was to work away out of teaching without saying goodbye, a way to run away, never to turn back. He wanted, in short, a new project demanding that he leave home at dusk one day and, without informing anyone, head for a brighter future somewhere beyond the darkening horizon. Suddenly, there it was. paths